Hi, this is Carolyn Heineman, and I am a member of the Bylaws Revision Committee here at the church, and a committee that's been working for the last couple years to review, add, subtract, and amend what we've been using as bylaws. So the purpose of these recordings are to introduce to you, article by article, what's been changed and what the new content is. So today's video is about Articles 1, 2, and 3. And if I can get this going from the beginning, there we go. So Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, we'll go through them in detail in a moment. The second screen that you're going to see in all of these recordings is to introduce you to the resources that we've made available on peopleschurch.net, which is the church website. On that page, you should find a link that sends you to another page that has all of these recordings listed, as well as numerous text document. It gives you the full text of the proposed bylaws. Pardon me. As well as a summary of the major changes, other documents such as who to contact, so all the committee names, phone numbers, email addresses, and more. So we invite you to watch recordings, read texts, contact those of us on the committee, attend listening sessions, participate in one-to-one conversations, all at your own discretion in terms of whatever you need. So a little more on that at the end of today's recording. The highlights of Article 1 and 2. So Article 1, which just names our organization. This is a required article for nonprofits registered in the state of Michigan. Has just a slight change in wording. And Article 2 declares the purpose of our organization. And again, just a slight rearrangement of some words in that article. Looking at the actual wording of Article 1, our name, you can see the original wording, and the proposed wording simply capitalizes the T in the People's Church, which is the legal name we have on record with the state, and identifies us as a member congregation of the UUA. We have been a member congregation for a long time. We intend to stay a member of the member congregation of the UUA, and so we thought it was time to just put that in writing to make it clear. Article 2, our purpose. The wording in the article is the object of this church is set forth in the bond of union. And then the full bond of union is stated in the document. I haven't put it here. There is a separate document on the church website that gives you the text of that. Some of you may already have your own copies. If you are members, you will have signed that document, and so may have it around. Article 3 is a little more involved. We're calling this commitment to equity. And the highlights of that are that it broadens our focus from our previous non-discrimination statement to a commitment to active transformation of individuals, ourselves, our church as an organization, and our community around us. And community can be neighborhood, city, county, state, nation. The other highlight is that we have defined the evaluation of the progress of our work on equity to be through the lens of marginalized communities. So much of what we do in terms of inequitable behaviors, words, policies, practices, structures, leadership is unconscious, or we haven't yet identified it, understanding that it is an inequitable item. So to self-evaluate, we will have that bias of not understanding that some of these things are inequitable. So the team thought it was important to define our success as being through the lens of those who are harmed by oppression, not by those who may still be unaware of how they are enacting oppression. To go into the actual wording, the first item in this article, People's Church affirms the need to dismantle all forms of oppression and commits to changing ourselves, our organization, and our society by. So the next couple of items will define that. But let me go back through this. Dismantle all forms of oppression. Very often we'll see statements that name race, gender, gender identity, class, abilities, mental abilities, physical abilities. And people will make an attempt to list all of those. What we have found is that as more and more conversation and activity and engagement of forms of oppression happen, we discover new definitions or new language or different groups that are being harmed. So we thought to not try to list it, but to make sure nobody is left out by saying all forms of oppression, period. Those already named and those are who are not yet, that are not yet named. And the change, we often think of equity work as leaving our building and going out into the community and sort of fixing, changing, transforming all those problems out there. As equity work continues, what we know now is that inequity lives inside of every one of us who have been socialized to think about ourselves, our world, other groups of people, our own group of people, in such a way that we enact that every day. And as I said a moment ago, often not even realizing that we're doing that. So the individual work, looking inside myself, is critical. Inside our organization, again, good people putting in place what we hope to be really good processes and rituals and structures and leadership. And yet, because we are unaware, we often set those up in a way that ultimately can do harm and does do harm. So looking critically at our own organization with love. So critical eye, always done with love. And of course, our society outside of our church walls, in our communities, small, medium, and large. So we're going to commit to dismantling oppression by, so 1A, is by building an environmentally just, diverse in all human traits, in other words, nobody left behind, multicultural, beloved community that accountably dismantles racism and all forms of oppression. Accountably dismantles means that if we self-evaluate, we're not going to understand our blind spots because they are unseen to us. And so by having engagement with communities who have been marginalized, by getting their eyes on what we do, both those inside our church who are already members and those in our community who will partner with us and help us look at ourselves, we get a 360-degree view of what we're doing. So accountability means engaging the people who are affected and having them be part of the process. Dismantles racism and all forms of oppression. Question I get very often is, why would you lift racism out and speak it separately when you've been telling us that all forms of oppression are critical to work on and change? I believe that. What we know, however, from work in activism is that in particular, people who identify as white are really very uncomfortable talking about race. And we know a lot about why that's true. And it's not true because people are bad or mean or somehow disgusting human beings. It means that it's really, really uncomfortable, and no one's ever given us practice in how to talk about it, how to look at ourselves in a non-judgmental way, but a factual way. And oftentimes what happens because of that difficulty is that when the conversation of race comes up, white people will often say, well, isn't that, for example, really about class? That's not really about race, right? And the reality is that it really is about race very often. So we lift that word out, not because it's the one important one, but because it seems to be the hardest one. And so we want to keep our focus on it so we don't forget to keep talking about it. We will also dismantle all forms of oppression by B, assuring that every action, policy, and practice governing and operating this congregation, hopefully conversation as well, aligns with the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that means that that's part of our organizational self-assessment, that with love, we will be really willing to dissect and look at and talk about and get feedback on everything we do, every committee structure, how we choose leaders, the rituals we choose, the language that we use, the music, the art, the everything about us. We will commit to taking a look at. Really complicated, really takes some time, really requires a lot of conversation. And over time, we're going to keep our eye directed in this direction to keep going and looking at everything we do. So part 2 in this article is about self-assessment. So I've already mentioned a couple of things about that. And so this is how we wrote about it. Our journey's success will be known by the lived experiences of those identifying as marginalized. So what we're saying is because of those places that we don't know how to look at yet, we're not aware of yet, we want to look to the people who are most impacted and are currently experiencing harm or have the potential to experience harm. We want people from different identity groups to give us feedback to say that particular thing, when I encounter it, does or does not help me feel like I belong here, right? We want that view from them. So our assessment, we can self-assess. That is awesome, and we need to do that. But the assessment, the deepest meaning and the deepest criteria is, do people who are members of marginalized groups feel like they belong? That's it for Articles 1, 2, and 3. This is the last slide you will see on every recording, again, pointing you back to the resources on the church website. Do as much as you feel you need to do to understand. We ask you to first seek to understand what these different articles are about and what they're intended to do. Once you understand, we really, really want your feedback. So we want your feedback on what you support and what you're concerned about. So the things I have listed on this slide, there will be listening sessions, probably late September. Some of those may be Zoom, some of them may be in person. We'll see what the virus allows. You can set up one-to-one conversations with committee members if you choose. To ask questions, you may contact committee members directly. You may also, and we encourage a heavy use of this email address, bylaws@peopleschurch.net, to get those conversations set up or to put out a question to gain clarity. And when you're ready, to give us that feedback. If you'd like to do that in writing, you can use this email address. If you'd rather do that feedback verbally, you can give that feedback to any member of the congregation. Bob Harden will be monitoring this email inbox and will make sure whatever you send there gets a response of some kind, whether he passes it on to somebody else or is able to take care of what you're asking about himself. Again, thank you so much for engaging in this process with us. We hope to see you more than once in this conversation as we all get ready to vote on this, which will probably be no earlier than November and may in fact go into the new year. We'll see how much work there is left to be done. Until then, may all beings be safe, and thanks for coming.